All right. Welcome back to another episode of I'm a Software Engineer. What next? Thanks for joining me again, Matt.
Thanks for having me, James. It seems like it's been forever since we last spoke.
Yes, it hasn't been that long, but for our viewers, probably a week or so since they've heard from us. And I spotted another T-shirt there. Is that right?
Yeah, this is going to really tweak the nerds in the room. I don't know if you can read it down the screen, but this is a box of universal paperclips, which I really enjoy. If you know the story there about the artificial superintelligence in charge of a paperclip factory that ends up turning the universe into computronium designed to produce paperclips, then this is the T-shirt of that dystopia. So yeah,
I feel like it's very relevant to AI at the moment.
I think we need to make a hat tip to Peter's T-shirt as well before we introduce him, because I think there's some serious nerd cred there.
Commodore
64.
How about I introduce Peter and then we can jump straight into the T-shirt.
Yeah, I want to hear about that T-shirt.
Today we are joined by Peter Marreck. He spent 4 years in the Air Force as an electrical specialist on a KC-10 refueller, actively trying to avoid anything to do with computers. It didn't take. He went back to Cornell, walked straight into startup work, and has been building web software since 2000. FactSet, Deloitte, ThredUp or ThredUp, Desk, then a decade running his own contracting shop, then director of engineering at Adgenes. These days, he's consulting on AI for legal workflows. Peter, welcome to the pod.
Good to see you guys. Happy to be here.
Thanks for coming along.
I recognize the Commodore 64, but maybe you can tell me a little bit about the T-shirt.
Sure, it dates me, but there was a time when that was the most popular personal computer in the world. And I was the only one in the neighborhood that did not have one, notably.
Oh,
so yeah, I had to borrow time on all my friends' machines, doing early basic coding work and stuff. The computer labs had a Commodore 64, and I would often be found in one during the summer sessions and whatnot.
I have very fond memories.
Talking like mid-'80s here.
Yeah. Well, I have very fond memories of growing up with everyone else having a Commodore 64, but me as well. So I know exactly how you feel. My dad, for some reason, decided to buy me a TI 994A. And I think not only was I the only person in the street that had one of those, but I think I was the only person in Australia at the time that had one. They were not a particularly popular machine. But it did get me into computers, so, I can thank it for that.
There's a certain simplicity about it that has maybe been lost since.
They were wonderful machines, 64s. They were just really wonderful. I mean, peeking and poking at arbitrary addresses in memory was just fun for the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just slightly missed that era, because to me, the Commodore is the Holden Commodore, which is a car in Australian, like it was probably the most popular car, family car. I don't know if it was named after the Commodore 64.
No. It's Commodore. Commodore is in the captain of a sailing club. But do you know what? That was actually one of the few cars that Australia exported to the United States. The Commodore.
Is that right? There you go.
It was a beast of a thing. This big V8 thing that Holden made. Anyway, that's a real digression. Let's crack on, James.
All right, Peter, I obviously did a quick intro there. Obviously, really interested to hear some of these transitions that you've had. You obviously didn't necessarily set out to be in engineering. Do you want to sort of step us through perhaps, that the earlier days, but then why you sort of got attracted to moving into software engineering?
I think I was always interested in computers ever since I touched one. Prior to that, I was going to be a doctor, and I was intent on that until I touched a Commodore, I guess, and things changed. I think the first Commodore was actually and this really dates me, it was a Commodore PET, talking green on black screen.
Yeah.
That was early on. I was around 8, maybe.
Yeah.
I was kind of spitting from that point forward, I think. And it was very strange to be into computers in the 80s. It was not popular at all, pretty much. Social suicide to some degree, frankly, which is also a reason why I tried to push it away in the early 90s, I guess I'd say. I was trying to diversify, which actually my mother was trying to encourage me to do, because she believed a single focus on anything is unhealthy. So just trying to get me to do outdoorsy things and whatnot. But yeah, it's become an obsession that I just gave into, I guess, over time.
It does seem to be a common thread for those that have been in software for a long time, is that they, when we've spoken about it on the pod before, is that they usually got into it because they loved it. There wasn't a real draw of money many years back. Obviously now there's still, there may or may not still be a draw.
Yeah, I think we may have peaked with that, James, potentially. But
I don't know about that. I think things are changing, but
Well, let me say this. There's a big difference between the median and the mean, right?
Mm,
And I think
mm,
the
mm.
mean at the moment might be much higher than the median
Yes.
because
Yes.
of some activity at one extreme.
I know what you mean. Yeah, absolutely. Matt, you often like to ask our guests a question. I think let's start with that.
So you've got a great career history here, which we're going to get into. But what I want to do is play time machine game as we do it every episode. And I want to give you a magic telephone that you can use to call your 25-year-old self. Perhaps foreshadowing some things we may talk about later on today. Just give me what we have to think about that. What questions? What information would you give to yourself, your 25-year-old self, that you think might help you back then? Based on what you know now?
I would say don't get stuck in ruts. If you're not growing, you're dying essentially. Don't necessarily take other people's advice into your judgment, but trust your gut primarily, because every time I've done that, it's usually worked out. And every time I haven't done that based on other people's advice. Most famously, the person who, by the way, told me not to buy Apple stock way back in the day because I should not invest emotionally. That was a big, that's remained in my memory as a not necessarily listening to other people, because my gut was saying Apple was going to go places. This is before the iPhone, by the way. So
I saw some hard numbers on this the other day, and it was something like a $20,000 or $30,000 investment in Apple at some particular date. I don't know when it was. It wasn't in 1990. Or whatever when they started, but a $30,000 investment in the 80s or the 90s would be worth like $150 million now.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's eye-watering.
Yeah. No wonder you learned that stuck with you, Peter.
Yeah. So giving stock advice down the magic 25-year-old telephone is not allowed. It's not allowed.
Buy Apple and Bitcoin. Done.
Yeah.
And never be heard from again.
Yeah.
Do you think that if you could go back, you would change anything with how you with your career, or would you do things differently?
Very good question. I think every error is a learning opportunity, so not necessarily. I think I had this question the other day. If I could have not been bullied when I grew up, would I have chosen that? And that's a tough one, because you're like, well, I feel like I am very anti-bully now, and I'm very anti-authority. That might have been an outgrowth of that, and that might have led even to career decisions that I might not have made if I wasn't bullied. I can't say that everything, that there are things that have silver linings that look, maybe challenging at first. So I don't know if I'd change anything, honestly. I think we end up paying costs for things inadvertently that produce a value down the line, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I know you can't say that for everything, but I think that's a better way of framing it for yourself.
Yeah, to know what, it's super interesting, because the kind of first order response to that question is, oh, I'd change this, I'd change that, I'd change this, right? And almost everyone we ask this question to says something similar to what you just said, which is, you know what, I don't think I would change much, because I wouldn't be the person I am if I went back and changed these things. And so it's interesting to hear that. And the particular things like the bullying side of it, you've obviously done well to get through that and then be able to frame it as a learning opportunity, because it's tough, right? I mean, I've got some firsthand experience and some experience with kids and stuff on that front too. It's hard work. It's hard work to get through that.
If we had a magical machine that could let us lead parallel universes of ourselves, having taken different decisions, almost like, I don't know if you guys did the Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Oh yeah.
Once upon a time, there was another formative
It's actually what got me
experience.
into computers.
Really?
Yeah, because what I wanted to do was I wanted to make a computer program version of Choose Your Own Adventure. That's
So did
I.
How am I not shocked?
Yeah.
So how you used to save pages by putting your finger in the page so you could go back in case you died.
Yeah.
Like if we had a machine that did that for real life, that would be amazing, because we could compare outcomes. We don't have that, so.
But don't you think that nothing really matters if there is an undo, if there's like a universal undo, like then nothing matters, right? So I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know that I'd want that.
Well, there is a universal undo in gaming, which is something you guys might have done before.
Yeah.
And restoring a save, and the game still feels meaningful.
Maybe, yeah. That's fair. All right. Good answer, Peter. I feel like there's a real rabbit warren of holes we could go down there to unpack. Let's roll forward now to today. How did you get here? Just give us the 2 minute how did Peter end up in 2026, April 30th?
2 minutes. So how am I in software? Like how specifically can you
Yeah.
constrain
Just give
that
us give us a quick potted history. Like who are we talking to?
So the things I seem to care about are correctness, authenticity, verification, and all of that started to steer me into functional languages about maybe 10 years ago. I was in the Ruby community for quite a number of years, doing Rails work in the startup space. The last major Rails experience I had was at desk.com, which was bought by Salesforce, and the Ruby code base was over 1 million lines of code.
A lot of
And
Ruby.
working on that was actually fascinating. Our test suite took 40 minutes to finish. We were pressed by management on why change was taking so long. And all of us, despite all of us saying it's, the test suite, and me literally volunteering weekend work to speed up the test suite because I really felt that was the blocker. We were unable to get it faster than about 30 minutes. And in fact, they rejected that I made over that one weekend that I spent my own time on as too risky because of how much I changed, even though it was still valid. So then I started to get sort of upset about Ruby and the trade-offs made, in the scaling sense in non-functional languages, such as the mutability of classes and whatnot. And I started to look at Elixir, which was inspired by Ruby, but had more guarantees. Next thing I know, I'm writing Ruby in the form of Elixir. And then next thing I know, I'm leaving that company and starting my own little development shop doing Elixir work.
Work? But just as a little footnote, when you were writing Ruby Elixir style, did it work?
Yeah, it did, but you lost guarantees. And that's what I realized. I realized that even if I write the most pure Ruby code possible, I'm still relying on libraries that may not. And I'm still subject to bugs that come up, without that guarantee. So why am I doing this is sort of what I started to ask myself. If I really was, striving for that purity, which has its own trade-offs, as we know, but at least you can, like the way I figured is if you're going to have a code base that's you expect to be maintainable for a long period of time, then any class of bug you can eliminate is potentially an infinite amount of work saved. Because if you consider it as a fraction of your total time spent, that fraction, of course, increases as time passes. So you've just saved yourself a potentially large amount of effort and gotten a permanent speed boost on your productivity. So that's what I started to realize, I guess.
You have been in some, like, I guess your own, you described it, I think, as your own shop, like contracting shop, where you've been, I assume, getting clients and doing projects for them. Before you did that most recently, or now you were also a director of engineering. Like with these moves, are you thinking of like, is it just opportunities that come up at the time and you go down that path, or have you been enjoying some of these projects? Like, are you quite deliberate about each move?
So before the director of engineering job, I was in charge of a couple of websites that were built in Elixir. One was for a real estate company. They ended up dissolving the board that was the main funding for that company. So I pretty much had to end that relationship. And that's when I started looking for an Elixir line job. When I arrived at Adgenes, it was actually through a mutual acquaintance with the founder. And he was looking for a way to use me because he felt I was talented. And I ended up coming on board with them. And the first thing I actually had to do is help convince them to use Elixir because at the time, they were trying to push Python. And I had a 1 hour long presentation I put together that basically showed why Elixir was a better decision for their architecture. And what was actually sort of a secret tool used in finance in certain spaces to produce better productivity and work. And I ended up convincing them to go with Elixir Phoenix. First job there, pretty much. And I was there for about a year, and then for reasons that are another rabbit hole, we parted ways.
Right.
Been just sort of independent since then.
Matt's spoken quite a bit about Elixir, like has been a really solid language, and I think that maybe even how you guys might have come across each other in the community. Like, what is it about Elixir that you have strong opinions about?
Well, let's see. The entire classes of bugs it eliminates, I think, is a good thing. There was a company, I can't remember their name, but there was the CEO spoke at one of the early Elixir conferences, and he had a device. It was a very vertical market device. It was a network hardware for large seaborne vessels, and very very niche thing. But he powered the whole thing with an Elixir stack, and his competitors were all using other stacks. And during one of their little expos, he was trying to explain to them how he never has to restart the device due to memory issues. And they were completely dumbfounded. They were like, how is that possible? He's like, well, we ran it for 2 months straight and checked this memory usage, and it was constant. And that's pretty much unheard of outside the Elixir space, hard to achieve that. And that's just an example of once you do eliminate an entire class of bugs, such as memory leaks, then that's literally something you don't have to worry about anymore. And that's the kind of thing that drew me towards it. I also think the community members are very craftsman-minded. They care about the build, and which I feel also ironically is, I think, a reason why there's so much contention regarding the LLM-powered coding thing, is because when you care about the construction, you're obviously going to be skeptical about something that sort of invades that space. Might be a good lead in towards that. Yeah, it's a combination of its design, which I felt was quite thought out, and the community drew me in there.
Interesting.
I would agree. The one other thing that I'd add, and I mean, we've mentioned it before, but the one other thing I'd add, because I start with the entire class of bugs eradicated point, because it's just a great point. But the other thing is just it's such a complete stack. So every time I go anywhere near the sort of JavaScript stack, they've got they're redefining the type system as the first thing that they do, or they've got all this kind of assembly stuff that goes on, and then you get to the back end and they're running Kubernetes, and then you need there's this old rhyme from childhood. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. I think she'll die. There was an old lady who swallowed a fly. We're going to dig it and dig it inside, blah blah blah. And then she swallowed as a spider, right? And she swallowed the spider to catch the fly. And every time I look at, and then it goes on and on and on, right? And she keeps swallowing more larger things to eat the thing that she swallowed beforehand. And I feel like that whole Kubernetes space is like that. It's so complicated. There's so much of it there that you have to have these other whole domains of product just to keep it running. Or in contrast, you get Elixir, you got the Beam, and it's kind of got all this stuff built in. And just the DevX of it it's so productive compared to just about anything I've ever used. So anyway, you've heard of this. Will get edited out because Jason's heard it all from me before.
I asked the question, so I could have avoided it, but I guess it's not a common language that I recruit for, but I heard people say good things about it.
Yeah, let's tie it into AI. You hinted at this, Peter, and I agree. Let's tie it into AI, because you've got some great thoughts on some AI stuff, and you've been doing some very interesting things, I think, with both with the sort of coaching, let's call it, coaching LLMs to write good code for you. But I think you've also had some good things to say about the technical architecture of systems that have been built with AI, and how that changes a little bit under the influence of agentic coding. I think that's what we're talking about. So let's spin it over there a little bit. Let me give you just a kind of really open question. How do you think agentic coding changes the coding experience, and how do you think it changes the human experience of coding?
So less attention to details, more attention to design decisions. One of the things I've realized is that because it makes most of the correct decisions at the detail level, the only things that are left are really difficult design decisions, which it then presents to you. I have a plugin that does that, Superpowers, I think it's called. And, I have an idea, we flesh it out, there's a spec, and then it's like, then please answer these 10 questions for me. And I have to really sit there and think about the answers, because they're non-obvious answers. And so where does that answer come from? And I think that's where your developer identity or intuition, I hate to use that word, but, something comes in.
Sorry, who asks the question of whom in that circumstance?
Oh, so the LLM is pushing back on me after I give it, it and I discuss the design. It's more of a collaborative process with it. And I'm also not paying as much of attention to the housekeeping details, I guess, the administrivia of coding, which I think we're all used to, and maybe we would miss. But, and another thing you might have to give up is stylistic differences. Because if we're talking about a future world where we're not writing every line of code, then we're literally just not going to see, on a daily basis, that someone is using the wrong style of the code. If it works, it passes tests, it's memory, it's performance, it's not leaking memory, you have all these, what I call, controls around it. And if those all pass and you verify that they pass them, it's essentially a working product. And it almost doesn't matter
Is that some rigging that you've built to make that happen, or are you just sort of doing it ad hoc as you go through?
It's sort of ad hoc as I go. I think this, we're still in the ad hoc phase. I think a lot of this is going to become productized, and it's already starting to be. There's things coming on the radar that are trying to productize these elements of it.
Mm.
And I built a couple of my own tools, and I'm sure you have too.
Yeah,
you're
that's why I'm asking. Yeah,
yeah. So we're building out these tools that we think are necessary. But there's this idea that I'm coming into called controls. I'm sure it's already out there. But this idea of like we have to do even more testing of it. Like we can't just do the pure unit and integration testing. We have to do logging performance suites that log performance over time to catch regressions there, because the agents will make errors that humans wouldn't make. Despite being geniuses, like they still do the screw ups. Unless you want to review every single line of code, which ends up being the bottleneck, and one that, by the way, we should try to eliminate. As much as I hate to say it, but you won't get your maximum productivity without doing that. You're going to have these other restrictions in place to catch those things.
Mm.
And you should still spot check. I think you can't see the paradox is, I think the goal is to try to take yourself out of the process as much as possible. I think this is counterintuitive because you feel like you're working your way out of a job. But in reality, what you're doing is you're making yourself more valuable for more work.
So you're sort of becomes.
Yes, and what the job becomes. Yeah, so you're actually elevating yourself over a larger stack of things that you're now responsible for. And that's counterintuitive for people. And I think some people, might say, I don't want to do that. I don't want to become that person. I like writing every line of code and vetting it myself. And I can't argue with them, honestly, because we've been doing that for years. I just think that's not going to last.
My pushback on that, not to you, but onto the people who sort of lament this. I don't know. There must be a German word for nostalgia for a time that never existed, right? Because this is kind of how I describe what these people are looking for, right? I've written a lot of code over the years, and it's frustrating as hell, right? Like 9/10 of the time, it's a bit like golf, right? 9/10 of the time, it's complete rubbish, and then you have one good shot, and you go, "Oh, that's why I'm here," right? And coding's a bit like that, right? Like a lot of the time, it's really, really frustrating, and then every now and again, you smash something out, and it feels great. But the whinging for this isn't coding as I remember it. I don't know. I'm not sure I have a lot of sympathy for that, because ultimately, what you're doing is you're trying to build products, so you're trying to build services. The arbiter of it, like code as art, is a thing we can have a chat about, but it's more like performance art or literally art, right? Like, and I can actually see some. I have respect for it, but that's not the day to day of what programming is, right? You're not writing code for the sake of art, right? You're writing code because you want to build something that has value and gives.
And I think that's why you and I are drawn to this, is because we are builders, not engineers, in the sense of being interested in the screws and the nuts and the bolts. We want to see the building.
Yeah.
And getting to the building faster seems like a win to us.
Yeah.
Maybe not to everyone. But yeah.
But what I've learned, it's a bit like self-driving cars. Is it like a metaphor I've got in my head? It's a bit like self-driving cars. There's going to be self-driving cars are not as good as humans as driving cars right now, but there will be a moment where there's a crossover, right? And the average deaths or average crashes, whatever stat you want to do per kilometer, for self-driving cars is going to be lower than that it is for humans. And in my book, at that point, we should switch and make driving by humans illegal, right? Because
that's a strong take.
Yeah. No. Yes, it's an intentionally
logically, yes. Yeah.
No, it's an intentionally provocative thing,
yes.
Right? I mean, I'm obviously just saying it provocatively, right? But if you stand back and look at that completely utilitarian view about like what's the best outcome for everyone, well, if machines are better at doing this than humans, then we should let the machines do it, and the humans should get out of the way. And the problem though with coding and like applying that to coding is at the moment it's really, really, really good if it's doing the right thing, and it's really, really, really bad if it's doing the wrong thing.
Yes to both.
Yeah. And so that's the trouble, right? At the moment, for me, the challenge is not so much can I get this LLM to write code, because I can and it will. The problem is what should it be doing? What's the right code to be writing? That's the challenge at the moment. That's how the job's changing, I think.
A question for you. What do you think the idea of the dark factory means for software dev? Because it feels like the thing that defines the product of software is no longer the code itself, it's the specification fleshed out. That you just hand to any current or future LLM and say, build this out, make it past the specification. If something is overspecified sufficiently, does that suffice as a replacement for the thesis, so to speak.
Mm.
Is
So
that a thing?
what do I think
What do you
about
think?
this? A good friend of mine, and here we go. I'm going to put this in. I'm just grabbing the link so I can drop them in the show notes. Alex Grosser, who used to work with me at Digital Ventures, he's starting a business at the moment called Nebula, and he's got this blog post called "I'm building a startup with brackets nearly no team. Here's what that actually looks like." And then the second post is what works and what doesn't work, and he's got this whole dark factory thing in there about what's going on. And so my question actually back to you is like, let's define what we mean by dark factory first. Right, just so everyone's on the same page. You tell me what you think that means, and I'll respond. Or what that means to you, sorry, and I'll respond.
A dark factory is a software factory, agentic driven, without actual developers, that operates off of a specification that is as complete as possible and produces one or an infinite number of pieces of code that satisfy those specifications.
Okay, and so
Is that good enough?
so yeah. So what we're saying is that it's a machine that takes a spec in and emits code out the other side of it. Is what we're saying. So the humans that are
the spec.
Yeah, the humans that are putting the spec in, or writing the spec even, or maybe collaborating with the LLM to write the spec, they don't actually touch the code. Yeah. Okay. So I feel like this suffers from an infinite regress problem, which is essentially, aren't we just moving the problem from code to the spec? And so all the problems that we have with code and LLMs just move to the problems now we have with the spec and LLMs. And then there'll be this sort of flurry of activity to write, how can we make rigorous specs that can be proven or verified? And actually what you end up doing is you just built another programming language.
Right. My favorite example for something that is spec driven and not code driven is the human body, because DNA has all kinds of garbage in it. And we still are functioning units of something.
Okay, that's an interesting.
The specs are externally applied. There's nothing looking at our DNA and eradicating the bugs that definitely exist in it. There's nothing verifying that, the duplication in the X chromosome that is missing in the Y chromosome nothing's calling that a problem. And it turns out it's not in our case. But I'm sure an initial engineer looking at that would have said, wait a minute, there's an entire leg missing here that's not duplicating this other one that's no good. And yet nature just kept moving forward and using that.
So that's interesting. So, but is the spec, oh gosh, this is a rabbit hole. Is the spec there?
It's the necessities of survival.
Yeah, yes. I don't know how I even asked the question. But is it definable? Oh, man, I mean, it really is. It's just guanine, whatever the GATA, what is it? GATC,
yep,
right? Yeah,
yep,
GATC.
Yep.
What? Okay, this is a whole podcast. This question.
And it's tough. So the whole DNA is code thing is interesting. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think it's code like we think when we say code, and you and I say code. I don't think it's code like that. I think it's kind of, and this is like almost certainly true, right? It's kind of chorded. It's chords. It's not just things. It's not binary things on and off, right? There's chorded relationships between the things that are on and off, right? That are not obvious. Just by looking at what is on and what's off, right? Some things like, my eye color is this thing on and off in you, say, but there's other things like my disposition to celery, right? Which could be a combination of many different things being on and off. Anyway, right. So just get back to the question. So dark factory, I think so Alex has got a whole point on this whole dark factory thing. The vision is you put requirements in one side, dark factory processes, and yet working software out of it. But what he did, and I think you've spoken about this before, and you might want to talk to it, is he's got this idea where there's a manual gate, and there's the gate emits things that are somehow not valid by some definition of valid, and then the human's invoked, so you get this human in the loop thing. And so maybe talk to that a little bit. You've spoken about your specs and your gates a few times on the Elixir Slacks. So I fear, to answer your question, I have some skepticism about the dark factory just as this thing that takes specs and outputs code. I have some skepticism about that. I like the idea of human in the loop. And I think that the question, though, is what role does the human play in the loop? At what level does it play? So maybe reflect on that.
So we've discussed this idea of the centaur coder.
Yeah.
It's kind of out there. I do believe that.
Do you want to just describe that quickly? So
Sure. I mean, it's what I've been doing for the last 5+ months. I feel like a centaur coder is a person collaborating with an AI to produce code and design. The outcome is much faster time to working product, and the negative is you occasionally have these issues that you didn't consider that the LLM picked the wrong decision on, and you have to go back and repair stuff because you didn't specify it correctly.
Yeah.
And that's the learning experience, I guess. So I think that humans will always be necessary. I don't believe in Dario Amodei's hot take on this, that basically LLMs are going to consume all software development. I think that the people involved in software, or at least some of them right now, will have an intuition that is irreplaceable to some degree, that very hard problems will come up that will require one of us to intervene and say, wait a minute, this design was a wrong turn back here, and that's why we had this problem here. And they're also actually going to use an LLM to help them find that problem, but that's a whole other story. But I think that we're going to remain in the loop to the extent that we try and stay on top of this wave. If we don't grab a surfboard when the tidal wave is coming, then we're going to get washed out. So
Peter,
that's what I've been sort of operating on.
Sorry, James, you go.
Do you think that, like, whether it be this Centurion developer or a software engineer as you know it, do you think there's going to be more demand for those people? Because at the moment we see more demand for software engineers because I think there's a lot of new business ideas and people are hiring, even though there's plenty of companies getting rid of people. Overall, there seems to be quite a lot of job openings. Do you think that will like flatten out or reduce or change, or like where do you see the role of a software engineer, whether they're called a Centurion engineer or whatever, like in the future? Do you think it's going to change a lot?
Actually, most worried about junior devs right now. I would love to be able to the junior devs about the situation, because I wouldn't want to be a junior dev right now. It looks like an intimidating set of challenges. I think Matthew and I are uniquely benefiting from the current situation because we have, most of the career already built on, encoding things and having done all the mistakes, or many of them, by hand. And so we can tell.
Times.
Yes, several times. Yes. And so when the LLM makes similar errors, we can say, oh, no, don't build that, do this, and so we have that intuition, or that, that experience of knowledge to direct it in a more correct, long-term correct direction. Whereas a junior developer would not have that. They might need someone like one of us to oversee them overseeing the LLM and say, hey, wait a minute, why didn't you ask it to do it this way? And this is why, I don't know what to,
This is the hardest bit of this. And I share your concern. I also think that the future is pretty grim for middle management as well, which we've spoken about before, because a lot of middle management is actually more easily obviated by some of these tools than the actual hands-on code, right? Like there's a view, I think a realistic view, which is that, notwithstanding what you've said about how you train the engineers to get the intuition, which is a thing I'll come back to in a sec, but there's this idea that a much smaller number of middle management can coordinate a larger pool of more junior folks to get stuff done with the help of agentic coding. Now, there's a question, like to your point, exactly. How do you get that? How do they get the intuitions about what's right and what's not right? And I don't know. I really don't know. And I'll give you a case in point. I am sitting here right now, or before this call, rewriting something that I spent a month writing because it got to a point and I went, oh, shit, right? I missed this completely. And now I'm looking at it, I'm going, oh, you muppet, right? What, right? And now I've had to unpack the whole thing and pull it out and refactor it and so on. And I don't know. But
so then why did you see it? I think it's because you love what you're doing, right? I mean, like that's why did you see it, and why do you care?
But that's not the bit that surprises me. Like I saw it because I care and I'm paying attention. What I'm worried about is how does someone without 5 years experience instead of 30, how does someone get the intuition that they need in order to use these tools in the right way? And I don't know the answer. I'm interested in what you think.
I think they're going to need us, frankly. For possibly a long time. I think the only way you're going to get that intuition is from hard-earned experience. But maybe you can get it with an LLM alongside. I think that they might even get it sooner if you consider that the LLM is accelerating you into the accidents and into the mistakes. So they might actually encounter more mistakes sooner and then learn from that sort of at an accelerated pace and possibly even get to where we are now sooner. So there's that possibility. Whereas we might tell them, don't go in that direction. If we were overseeing it, they might actually go in that direction, see the problem with it, and then go back to the LLM and say, no, that was the wrong way. We got to do it this way. And then
let me ask you a sort of deep philosophical question then. Are we at the point where machines So where do you set the dial on this, right? Like in kind of one of three spots. Machines will never be able to do what we just spoke about. Machines are on their way, but they're not there yet, or machines are already doing that. Where do you think that dial's set?
So it was like 2 or 3 months ago where I realized that it had been an entire month before, since I had seen Opus unable to solve a bug. And I came to that realization going, oh, okay, that's interesting. So it actually did some semblance of deduction, in order to narrow down where the bug was coming from. And whether its solution was long-term valid or not doesn't matter because it satisfied the requirement of solving the error. I might have looked at it and said, hey, that was a less optimal way of solving it, but it still technically solved it, and these things are goal-seeking, so it did. But that was a turning point, I think. So now debugging is essentially mechanical. Maybe it was always mechanical to some degree. It's a skill, and it's somewhat mechanical. But debugging seems to be off the table on that sense already.
How does it know?
Degree.
Where was? Oh, hang on, there's a bug here. Where did that come from? I say prompt, I don't mean LLM prompt, but I mean, where was the trigger for the bug? Where did that come from?
You mean what control found the bug? Or what?
Okay, there we go. Yeah,
test failure.
Yeah.
So it was either a test failure or an error in live usage, runtime error, typically.
But it was automated. The discovery was automated, or you found it? Is what I guess.
It was both cases. So in some cases it was automated and it ran into the bug itself, and in other cases I found it and it wasn't covered by a test, and I had to ask it to get covered by a test, and then it solved it. One thing that it doesn't do, this is an example of the intuition not being embedded in the model yet, and this particular one might eventually be soon, I'm hoping, is to simply, if you encounter a bug, write a test for it first that fails. Like that's something that you and I do, like, in a heartbeat, and something that maybe junior developers and LLMs also don't seem to do. Mine only recently started doing it after probably many copies of different prompts that are in its memory and pre-prompts and Claude.md and whatnot, where the first thing it does when I say, hey, there's a bug here, here's a stack trace, it's okay, let's first write a test for it that fails. And so it's finally doing that. And so, proving that it solved the problem, actually. So, but it wasn't doing that on its own for quite a while.
Yeah. I still have to smash it with a hammer to get it to do that kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's, so we still have a job doing that, I guess you could say.
Yeah. James?
I think, what would I say about that? So it's unclear really what the role of a software engineer will be, but solving problems will always be like what's needed, I guess. There's always going to be issues. Even I am working with some tools now, building basic little products and things that we use day to day, and I feel like I can use the LLM to debug issues, and I find it fascinating how it talks through how it solves a problem. It's almost like talking to a human in that it's like, oh, I didn't try this, or I should have done it this way. Let me try this, and I think it's obviously only going to get better. So it's going to iron out a lot of those problems. But
how do you know, James? How do you? Let me ask you a question now. A bit unusually, like as someone who doesn't have a formal or even an informal background in computer science, how do you know what questions to ask? Like how? Yeah, I mean, I'm curious because this is sort of the essence
looking for the output, and so I will say, like, I want this, and then it will build it, and then I'll say, okay, good, but we need to change this, and then I'm watching it sometimes. Sometimes I just let it go, and it comes back when it's got an error or something, but then it's talking through like how it's going to solve that problem or what it's trying to do, and I just watch it. But I'm purely looking at it from the output. So you may look at it and review it and go, oh, there's all these problems there. But for me, if it's working, nothing I'm building needs to be secure or robust. But yeah, if it works, for me, that's how I tell. That's how I can tell if it works, because I can click on it and it works. It does what I want it to do.
He's an old adage for it.
Yeah, there's an old adage in software: make it work, make it right, make it fast. And I always just took that as an aphorism before, and it is just it's hitting home so heavily at the moment because people stop at the first point, right? Make it work. And just because it works doesn't mean it's right. And in many cases, if I look at something on the screen and I'm just saying, do this thing, give me this visual thing, and it does, like it works, it'll actually be okay. That'll be working. But when you get more complicated stuff or complex stuff like behind the scenes, you're going to put integrations together. You need to run validations and things. The make it right step is fundamentally important, right? Because some things will look like they're working, and they may well work for some value of work, but they're not right. And that's a I don't know, that I find this at the moment, that everyone seems to be, all the vibe coders in the world are stopping at work when they really need to go an extra step and push through to make it right as well as work.
Matthew, have you ever had the situation where you were asked to make a mock-up for something and that ended up going into production because it worked?
So many times. And honestly, these days, I just assume that is production when that sort of thing happens, right? If you're asked to mock something up, or I try and avoid getting in that situation.
You just built the production one, right?
Do you think, Peter, that all these AI tools are making our lives easier? Are they making things more complex or less complex and or complicated?
I think that they're very seductive. And they offer both benefits and potential disadvantages. I'm also concerned, as are many right now, about the erosion of skill. So by leaning on the LLM for part of our decision making, are we actually reducing our own capacity to make those decisions down the line, for example? And how much of a problem is that really? That's an example of my concern.
Have you heard of the concept of cognitive surrender?
It sounds dystopian.
Well, it's. I'll drop the links. I'll drop the links. These are going out in my Quantum Facts Machine blog this month. Shameless self-promotion, but I'll drop the links in the show notes. There's a paper. Where was it? Actually, Martin Fowler did something on it as well. Where's the original paper? Anyway, I'll drop the links in the show notes. The point here is that a bit like, when you've got oops, I've lost my screen. You've got type 1 and type 2 thinking, right? There's a kind of type 3 proposed, which is where you hand off. It's external thinking, right? So you've got reflexive, reflective, and then external. And there's a penalty paid for this cognitive surrender. The more you put onto that third category, the more kind of detached you get from the deeper understanding. And I've seen this myself a little bit. I'll rely on it to do stuff, and when it's right, it's great, right? But when it's wrong, sometimes it's a bit easier than I would hope or I would like. It's a bit easier to miss it, that it's wrong than I would otherwise like. And I wonder if I'm getting worse over time at spotting when it's wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Like you might not even notice that it's happening. Like that's the scary dystopian bit.
Yeah.
When how similar is this to when the calculator emerged and suddenly no one could do long division anymore?
They use that example now in the paper. They actually use that exact example in the paper.
Hilarious. It's an obvious one, maybe. Yesterday the AI was trying to convince me that my own ideas are not owned by me because I might simply be a stochastic, materialistic, biological machine. I'm like, thanks for gaslighting me. I still like to think that my ideas are my own, but perhaps they're just the result of a random walk. I don't know.
Okay, we have so many rabbit holes.
I'm generally optimistic about the future with AI. I think it is a little bit scary. I think people should continue to love what they love. If it's coding and the process and the engineering, I think people should just continue to push on it and try and take advantage of this AI thing and manage it. Manage expectations around it, especially. But I'm building an app right now that I would have never been able to build before its existence. So. There's that, and hopefully I'll release that on the App Store. It's very close to being released.
Let's do a little bit of a bonus track kind of thing.
Sure.
Because I want to talk about this because you've got some good things to say on architecture of these things, and your whole Zig thing with and driving Zig with the LM I thought was fascinating. Whether we may replace something else with this bit if it works. So let me set it up. You and I, Peter, we've been speaking recently about the architecture of applications under the influence of agentic coding, and it's not just simply making the old apps the old way, the architecting the apps the old way, the way we used to when we're handwriting the code. Now with some agentic support behind the scenes, there may be an argument for slightly different architectures for some of these things. And you made a point recently as well about doing something in, I think it was Zig, as a kind of a very low level machine binary that could then be included in a few different spots, right? Whereas traditionally you'd never have done anything like that, right? Or I certainly wouldn't have done anything like that because I was like, why would I program something in C or Zig or something like that? Because it's way too low level. So talk me through that. How do you see the architecture of the apps we build changing under the influence of agentic coding?
So in my Zig experiments, and I was probably as surprised as you to stumble into it, but I really wanted to build a tool at the time that was a low-level tool that would help me get Elixir work done, and ended up being enthralled with Zig. Mainly it's speed, because the speed is just unbelievable. Frankly, if you've only done functional languages for quite a while,
You mean
it's quite
runtime
eye-opening.
speed? You mean runtime speed?
Runtime speed,
Yeah.
runtime speed,
Yeah.
I mean, it's also good at compiling and whatnot, but it's just a well-designed language. It's not functional though, but it does get you very close to the hardware, and it's understandable. There's no magic. So, and that is also, I think, why it's an excellent tool for LLM use, because the LLM can understand things, and I put that in quotes, but because we don't know what that means yet. But it does seem like it has a facsimile of Zig understanding sufficient to produce well-working Zig code.
I find this really interesting. What is it? Is the lever there that's making it better for an LM? Is it the simplicity of the language?
I think it's a couple of things in Zig's case. I think it has to do with it being similar to C, and there's a giant amount of C code that I'm sure it's been trained on. So there's some of the same patterns underlying the two languages, and I think that carries over. And I think it's also the simplicity of Zig as an extra layer on top is something that I can grok, frankly. And I think that combination is powerful.
So talk us through the architecture, because you had a novel architecture for. I mean, like, to the extent you can, just give us a rough spin on the architecture, because you did some things where it's like, you did what, right? And
So
I think
the
you did it
idea,
only,
yeah. So I did this for a number of apps at this point, and so they have a Zig core, and it tries to be a pure core, meaning there's no I/O. I've recently had to switch that to only I/O for file objects, because stuffing complete files in RAM ends up being costly. So the Zig core is only essentially a functional core with no I/O, and has a CFFI on the outside. And that's something that can easily be added to a Zig core with an LLM. And so once you have a CFFI, you can attach any front end to that. You can put a Windows front end, a Mac front end, TUI, CLI front end, because all of your core logic is Zig.
And that's in process. Like you're binding the Zig library, whatever it is, like in process with whatever that other runtime is.
Yes, through the CFFI. Yeah, so that ends up being both scalable and very flexible. So yeah.
Okay, so it's interesting. So I call this the thin coordinator pattern, what you've just described, right? So I write a pure functional core to the extent that I can, and then everything else is a thin coordinator, right? There's no business logic in anything anywhere else, right? It's all just coordinating that.
It's hexagonal design, I think, is the original term for it.
Yeah, I also call it the bow tie, which is imperative edges functional core, IEFC, which is a kind of 40-year-old pattern. I think I mentioned that to you the other day. This 40-year-old pattern where you basically make a pure functional core, and then you perturb the state imperatively, and then that state's changed, and you get emissions, and then you imperatively interact with the emissions, as you need to.
So that design restriction was decided on by me, not the LLM, and that's an example of, I think, where we're still necessary. Why did I pick that design? I just saw it as being more flexible down the line. Notably, the LLM tried to work around it, and when I had to build a Zig TUI for one of the Zig cores, it bypassed the CFF. And I'm like, why are you doing that? We need to stick to this paradigm to maintain the correct abstractions. And it goes, oh, you're absolutely right. Let me undo that. And so it made the error because it could. It was too easy for it to call directly into Zig because it was front end of Zig, and it didn't understand that there had to stay a strict division there. So that's
I have exactly. It's funny now that you've described it. It's funny. I've got exactly the same thing going on. I have built a set of critics, one for each language that I'm using: an Elixir one, a Lua one, a Swift one, and a Rust one, right? And I'm trying, and one of the patterns it has to enforce is this thin coordinator idea, right? So no business logic in anything on the outer layers and whatnot. I thought I'd been pretty good at it, and I ran the critics on it just earlier today, and it's got, oh, hang on, we've got all these violations here where it's like doing ash query assembly inside a handler, Elixir handler. It's like, why is it doing that? I've told it so many times. And you just have to stop getting frustrated with yourself when it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And put, as you said, put in the checks to go looking for this stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you put in a control for that. Yeah, you have to put in a hard control that fails it if it does that. I mean, that's really the only restriction that is guaranteed to work, unfortunately, is that.
Yeah. Okay, James?
I think that, I think we'll do that now. I'm just trying to think of the best way to wrap it up. Maybe we'll just go with, is there anything else that you want to add or anything that you want to talk about, Peter?
Don't be afraid. Press on. Work with it.
As in advice. That's a bit like the advice to you 25 yourself, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You're right.
When you
So
say don't be
specifically
afraid, don't
around
be afraid of what kind of
because
things
I
might a
think
software engineer be afraid of? Is it AI or is it?
yeah, it's the influence of AI and whether they're going to have a job tomorrow.
Yeah.
Which is a real fear. I mean, not just because of AI's fault. It's the manager who thinks that they can replace their entire team with AI and then has to come back and rehire because they found out the hard way that it's not going to work that way. I mean, the problem is to the ears of managers is pretty much the best sell in the history of software. You know, you can fire your most costly center, which is your labor, and then have a Claude Max plan with one developer producing the work of a dozen potentially. That's a huge, that's music to the ears of a manager. So I honestly think that you should not fire your engineers just yet. In fact, I would say that this is your opportunity to dig into the giant backlog you probably have. Once the engineers adopt work accelerated LLM development, they can tear into that backlog. In fact, they could use that backlog as since those things have been on the backlog for so long, they're clearly not as valuable, but they still have value. You can start with those things with your LLM experimentation and see what you can produce out of that backlog that you wouldn't even have a chance to, due to time restrictions. So don't fire your developers, and developers, don't be afraid. I think this is a matter of accelerated productivity, not replaced productivity.
Yep.
I think that's
I
the
think
real
that's good
opportunity.
advice.
You're going to get more for the same amount of money you're putting into your devs. Essentially, don't fire them.
The one thing I would say, I could sort of add that to that as a footnote, is I don't know how many people today are sort of lamenting the loss of the New York buggy whip company. And so I think my follow on.
We've discussed this. Yeah.
Yeah, my follow on bit of advice there is make sure you're not making buggy whips.
Yes.
I
And what would
don't
that?
know
What
what a
is the
buggy
form
whip
of
is.
that? Tell him the anecdote.
Oh, okay. So the New York buggy whip company was quite a large company in New York that made horse whips. When the primary mode of transport in New York was the horse and buggies.
Yeah.
And when the car came along, they were a massive advocate, or they were lobbying for cars not to be allowed and all sorts of stuff, right? And then eventually no one needs buggy whips anymore, right? I think that there was like this whole thing about number of horses. Was it something like the 10 horses for every human at one point, and now there's 1 horse for every 10 humans?
It's gone the inverse. Yep.
Don't quote me on those numbers, right? I literally
It's something like that.
up. Yeah, I literally just made that up, but it is something along those lines. And my advice is like at the moment there's a whole lot of people making buggy whips, okay, and the world's changing.
So what is the current form of the buggy whip? You would say?
Well, I don't know, sitting there, cranking the handle, writing.
Is it writing lines of code like yourself?
Yeah, turning tickets in Jira in an enterprise, writing CRUD software for a bank, right, or an insurance company. That's buggy whip manufacturer.
What do we do about the orgs that refuse to accept any work that has LLM assistance in it, such as Zig, most notably? They refuse.
Yeah, I saw that today. Actually, yeah, I saw that
with LLM assistance.
Really?
What do you think?
I don't know. So, okay, look, I don't. They're much smarter than me, those guys, right? Anyone who's written something like Zig, much smarter than me. So far be it from me to to sort of tell them what to do. But I guess what I'm always wary of, just as a general rule, is normative answers to things. And we don't accept AI generated code is a weird normative answer. It's like saying, let me give you an analogy, maybe.
It's not rational.
It's not rational indeed, but let me give you an analogy. Imagine saying to graphic designers they couldn't use Photoshop plugins. Mm-hmm. Right. Or whatever, right? It's that kind
Some
of
other tool,
now,
right? Mm-hmm.
I mean, am I going to just use, what's it called? Whatever the latest image generation tool is to generate an image, I'm going to get something pretty ordinary, but using diffusion filters or whatever in a tool like Photoshop, is that where's AI versus not AI? Right. And I'd apply the same logic to code.
So would I. I think the main argument is they have more code to review. And my pushback on that is, why are you reviewing it manually? Why aren't you getting agentic assistance and code review to help you digest all that? And then my counter argument to not accepting any LLM assistance at all is, well, what is your reasonable, specific argument against that pull request? Is it the design is poor? Is it the poor use of, just say something that is not just, we are rejecting this because an LLM assisted with it. Because what you're incentivizing in that case is people lying about their assistants, because to some degree this has become unavoidable. And then where do you draw the line? Autocomplete, auto function complete, auto entire file complete, like. And so you really have to be like, I think, it's my opinion, obviously, you have to be very specific about what your rejection of the pull request is. You can't. I don't think it's reasonable, in my opinion, to say we do not accept LLM code. Period. It just doesn't seem reasonable to me, frankly.
Yeah, without going into detail here because it's potentially controversial, but does the art transcend the person that made it? Right? Like, is the art good regardless of who it was that made that art? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's
who is ultimately responsible? It's the person. If the LM screwed up the code that it assisted you with, that's still on you. Like,
agree.
So you can't say I blame it on the LLM because you were using the LLM to make the code. So as long as you're still responsible and you still feel responsible and you still claim responsibility, then where's the lie there? If the person's PR is 1,000 lines of code and you're mad about that, but it also made your compilation 4 times faster, then what is your specific objection to that?
Or what if I make a GIST with the 1,000-line rationale and my PR is only 4 lines with a link to the GIST, right? So
right.
There's perverse. It just as you said, it just encourages perverse incentive generator. That kind of policy. It really is. It really is. I wonder if in 25 years, Peter, if we had an opportunity to talk again, and you got the chance to call your, I don't know how old you are now, but your 2026 self, that if we may be having the same conversation about LLM-assisted code, or whether
it'll be like the Terminator 2 post-apocalypse, and we'll be like hiding in bunkers. I'll be like, go do it.
Yeah. That's not even. The frightening thing is that based on the kind of weird timeline read at the moment, it's not zero, right? It's just not. It's not zero.
As in not
and
zero
on that
chance.
Happy note, it's a non-zero chance that what you just described is true, right?
I mean,
it's non-zero.
There's 2 possibilities for bad things happening. It develops a malicious will of its own, which I don't think is going to happen, or a person with malicious will is going to be in charge of one that takes us there.
Yeah, that's probably more likely.
Or what's kind of worse, right? It's not malfeasance,
not
it's incompetence.
It's
incompetence.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's the bit where it's non-zero, right?
Fair enough.
Because the smartest people aren't always the ones in charge.
So if we're increasing complexity to the point where we don't understand what's actually happening anymore, then suddenly we have a glut of incompetence, essentially.
Yeah. I said the other day that there was a there was that G-Stack thing. The G-Stack, the guy, was it Gary Tan from Y Combinator, published his whole bunch of prompts, and it was just such first order thinking. When it first came out, I went, "This is just a bunch of prompts, mate. It's just a bunch of markdown. Like, it's not revolutionary. We've all done this, right? But somehow or other, because it came from someone in a position like he has, it's like manna from heaven. And then there was a real teardown of it. A week or so later, I thought, finally, okay, good. It wasn't just me. There was actually other people who thought the same thing. And it occurred to me that, frighteningly, what we may have created is Dunning-Kruger as a service.
Or you don't know that you don't know. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe on that happy note,
the Dunning-Kruger apocalypse.
Yeah. Or I don't know. Did you ever watch Idiocracy, the film Idiocracy?
I love it.
Yeah. Who knew that was a documentary?
It's a documentary, exactly.
Yeah. Who knew it was a documentary from the future? Yeah.
Yep. All the doctors in that movie were AIs. It's just hilarious. It writes itself.
I'm going to look that up after this.
If you've not seen it, honestly, I'm going to drop it in the show notes. If you've not seen it,
it is aged like fine wine.
But it's not a great movie. Like, the hilarious thing is, it's not a great movie, right?
Yeah, watch it for the things it says. It's funny, but it's not like a.
When I watched it at the time, I thought, okay, I kind of get it. It's a bit silly and whatnot. It's like this $5 bottle of supermarket wine accidentally turned into a 500-pound bottle of wine, and no one was expecting it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll certainly enjoy it if I watch it now.
You won't believe how prescient it is.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for coming on. I think we could obviously talk for a while. There's a lot of different avenues we could go down.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to put some notes where people can find you if they're looking for you. And I look forward to getting you back on in 25 years and looking back to see what actually, it may only be a few years that we need to laugh at some of the ideas that we had about the future.
Looking forward to it.